All right, greetings, welcome back. This is, of course, a Montreal Canadiens. This is the barber pole, and it's a sweater. It's legit. It's not a jersey. It's a sweater. I don't mind wearing this every now and then. Kind of fun. And of course, Canadiens hat because I don't have a hat like this to match, which is too bad. Because a barber pole hat, you'd be able to see me from space. So today's power rankings brought to all of you fine long-term subscribers as well as casuals. This seems to be the video that brings in a lot of casuals. There are people that I swear just wait for the power rankings to come in and go, and you're stupid, and they run off. Which is fine. That's what they want to do. That's fine. Just watch the ad first. Number 31 this week is still number 32. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's Buffalo. The Buffalo Sabres this week, Eastern Division, of course, they went 0-3. They're 6-19-4. It's bad, and it's bad enough that, yes, the Seattle Kraken, still 31st. No team, no coach, no problem. They're still ahead of the Buffalo Sabres, who, of course, had a game postponed today against Boston, which might be for the best. Considering the way that first game against Boston went, might just be for the best. So, yeah, Seattle's ahead of them. Number 30, dropping one spot from last week. They went 1-2. And tonight's result was kind of discouraging. So, it's the Anaheim Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks, right here in the West, 8th in the division, 30th overall. And now they're at 9-17-6. And they're likely selling players off at the deadline, and we'll see how the trade deadline goes. It's going to be a pretty quiet trade deadline, but of course we'll have a live stream here on deadline day, because why not? And then we can all debate at the end of the day, so what did that accomplish exactly? I get the feeling there's not going to be much happening on deadline day. In fact, a lot of teams right now look like, because of cap reasons and the border and all that, they're going, we'll just go with what we've got. And maybe that's for the best. The worst thing you can do is overcorrect at the deadline. Brian Burke used to always say, I'd rather do nothing than do something just because I have to. Number 29. He may live that way. That may be his whole mantra for life. I'd rather do nothing than do something because I have to. And I'm paraphrasing. Number 29, moving up one spot from last week, they went 1-0-2. And they're competitive. So with Ottawa, that's really the most you can ask for from them right now, is that they're competitive, and they don't give you an easy 2 points. They might give you the 2 points, but it won't be an easy night. And so for the Sens, who've now earned a few days off after that last loss against Vancouver, they gave them a hard time. It was much more difficult for Vancouver to defeat them this week than the previous 3 games in Vancouver. So I moved them up to 29th. It's faint praise, I know, but yeah, I think they had as decent a week as you can get from them right now. Number 28, same spot as last week. They're 10-18-4, and they were 2-2 this week. And honestly, for Detroit, they're pretty firmly in 28th. They were at 27th at one point this week, but they're pretty firmly in 28th. Again, they had a 500 week. They were 2-2. They beat Dallas, and then they lost to Dallas, and I kind of went, well, they're kind of in the right spot. Because the game that Dallas played against them tonight, Dallas goes to 10-10-7. Dallas ends up 2-1-1 this week. So Dallas ends up staying 27th, which is just ahead of Detroit. So again, in the bottom 5, no movement. These two swap spots. So pretty set in terms of where these teams are in the bottom. And I had to take a look before this power rankings and do a couple of adjustments to where teams were according to the records this week and just the general outlook for them. But yeah, these bottom 5, again, we'll see if Dallas can build on the win tonight, but tomorrow they have a much more difficult job, and they have to play basically every other day and a lot of back-to-backs, so it's going to be tough. Number 26, these guys dropped 6 spots from where they were last week. They went 1-2-1 this week, so they won 1 out of 4 games. And that win was against the Ducks, who again are 30th. So the Coyotes take a bit of a dive down to 26th and down to 7th in their division. Rough week. It happens. And again, for the Coyotes, we'll see whether or not they do a sell at the deadline or what they do, because the playoffs are not out of shouting distance for them. Even though they had a challenging week, St. Louis didn't, pack on a whole bunch of points. So there's still reason to be hopeful if you're a Coyotes fan right now, and you believe they can make it. It's possible. Anything's possible. Sure, anything. You name it. No, not that. Not that. Let's be realistic. Number 25, staying in the same spot as last week. They went 2-1 this week. They're now 13-17-1, and it's Nashville. And again, Nashville to me, it's an up and down sort of proposition. The loss against Florida, to me, it kind of shows they're in the right spot on the board. They played well against Tampa, yes. They did go 2-1 this week. We'll see if they can continue to rack up more wins than losses, but they're still, overall, their record's 13-17-1. It's not a very strong picture overall for Nashville, and they're still listed as probably sellers at the deadline. So that's 3 teams from the Central already on the board. Next up, going back to the West on this one, number 24, dropping 3 spots from last week, and that's San Jose. San Jose went 0-3-1 on the week, so they're now 11-14-4, and while they're competitive, and they are, the game against St. Louis tonight, I thought that score probably flattered St. Louis a little bit, but overall, it's been a rough week for them, and I don't want to penalize them too much for losing against Vegas, because everybody loses against Vegas, but again, they take a bit of a drop in their division. As Vegas continues to beat on the teams in the bottom 4, they'll probably be on the board relatively quickly. Because, again, Vegas just shows they have that ability to just come back. Haha, you thought you beat us. You didn't. Oh, you got us again. That's only the 67th time. Let's go again. Number 24. These guys move up 2 spots. They went 2-0-1 this week. They get a shootout win tonight. And they're in a playoff spot. So Columbus, I've got them at 23rd. It's not a ringing endorsement for Columbus. And again, we've already got 4 teams in the Central on there. So this week they go 2-0-1. The one win is a shootout. They're 13-12-7, so they've won 13 out of 32 games. It's been a rough year, but that playoff spot right now, they're in it. If they can get Laine going, that's a big if. But if they can get Laine going, Columbus may very well nail down that spot over the next couple of weeks. And who knows? Maybe Jarmo Kekalainen takes a look at his roster and says, you know what? We can bring somebody in at the deadline. And he adds somebody, and maybe it makes a big difference. But Roslovic, I still think, has been decent for them. But again, their scoring seems to be kind of hit and miss right now. So we'll see how it goes. Number 22. These guys move up 2 spots from last week. They went 2-1-1. They're now 10-14-4. And that's New Jersey. New Jersey just hanging around. And Scott Wedgwood making the argument that he may very well be a pretty solid option for them if Blackwood ends up missing a certain amount of time. But yeah, because goalies have been missing a lot of time this year, so you have to kind of plan for 3 goalies this year, which was what the NHL warned us about before the season started. But so I still have New Jersey at 7th in the division, but I have them 22nd overall. I think that New Jersey, has kept games kind of close, and we'll see. We'll see whether or not they can get to 500 or near 500. Odds are probably not, and they're probably going to sell at the deadline. Number 21. They move up 1 spot this week, even though they only went 1-2 this week. They're overall 12-11-6, and that's the Kings. Kings are tough to read. Again, you look at some of their losses and wins and all that, and it still feels like the Kings are in this. Though, if they have another week like this one, and if St. Louis continues to eke out wins here and there, it's going to stretch itself out, and then LA won't be in it. But it still feels like they're in the race, even though the record hasn't been fantastic. And I like Cal Peterson's game. He's played well when he's had to play. And I do think Jonathan Quick may very well end up playing somewhere else. And then we'll see what LA does with their goaltending tandem beyond this season. You got Peterson. Who do you have backing him up? Who do you bring in? And what's the future look like for the Kings? Are we going to see some of these young kids come up and play for them before the season's over? Are we going to get a look at that? And is that going to be dependent on where they're at after the deadline. So do you bring them up after the deadline for a look at them for 5 or 6 games? Be interesting to see what they do. Number 20. So these guys take a bit of a dive this week. They're down 5 spots. They lost all 3 games they played this week. And it's not Chicago's fault. The schedule's really tough. But the really tough schedule has shown us that Chicago, it may have been some fool's gold in Chicago's overall record. So for Chicago, going 0-3 this week hurts them. And again, they're much closer to Columbus this week than they were last week. Last week they were 15. Columbus was 26, so they were 11 spots apart. Now they're 3. So that's a pretty dramatic shift over a week. And it shows that Chicago, it's just they've petered out. And again, it's Tampa, right? It's Tampa, it's Florida, it's Carolina. These are really good teams. But it's shown that Chicago has a long way to go to catch up with those ones. So maybe a surprise return of Kirby Dach at some point turns things around, but for right now it's not. Number 18. This team went 2-2 this week. So they were 500, but they dropped 1 spot. Because when Philly loses, they lose big. Philadelphia now. I have them at 6th in their division. So on the power rankings, I have them sitting pretty far down, and they've had a pretty tough go of it. We'll see what ends up happening with the Philadelphia Flyers, but it's been a pretty rough week. Again, they were 2-2, but man, those losses. It just makes you wonder if the wheels are going to fall off for Philly here, and it's just they're so poor in those losses. Number 18. This is the biggest riser this week. They went 3-0-1. And, for a road trip to go 3-0-1 on the road, especially when before that road trip, I think they were 4-9. It says a lot. They're now 7-9-1 on the road, and now they come home, and we'll see where they're at. Vancouver, they make up some ground. So Vancouver at 18. That's the highest spot they've had on this listing in, I'll say, at least 6 weeks. I don't actually have the number in front of me, but I'll say 6 or 7 weeks. And again, it's that they won. Chicago's losing. LA wasn't winning. Philadelphia had a really rough week. So Vancouver jumps over other teams that are having their struggles. And again, nothing in regulation for Vancouver, but they did come out of a road trip with 7 out of 8 points. So they're getting the points when they need them, and we'll see whether or not they can fight their way into the playoffs. They're 8-2-1 in their last 11 games. So yeah, it's been a good run for them, and it's a matter of how far can Demko pull them. I'm being honest. It's a lot of it's Demko. This is Demko's spot. If I could have put a picture of Thatcher Demko on that board instead of the Canucks, I might be tempted to do it. Number 17. With a 2-1-1 record this week, they move up 2 spots. They're now 13-13-4, and like I said, they move up 2 spots, and that's the Rangers. So the Rangers at 17th, I have them 5th in their division in terms of how they're playing right now. I have them ahead of Philadelphia, but I still have them outside the top 4. So for the Rangers, it's still a bit of a slog for me to see them, in that top 4, but I do have them ahead of Philadelphia in terms of their play right now. And that win over Washington, that could be a big one. We'll see because again, for the Rangers, it's been a matter of building on it. Well, now Zibanejad seems to be playing pretty well. They've got Panarin back. Maybe now is when they start building on it. Number 16. They went 2-0-2 this week, so they know not to lose in regulation. They finally got an overtime win. They're now 14-8-9, so moving up 1 spot into the second column is Montreal. Montreal, it's not always pretty with Montreal how they win, but they didn't lose in regulation. They go, like I said, they were 2-0-2. Pretty decent week for them. I move them up 1 spot. We'll see whether or not they're ready to actually nail down a playoff spot, because I have them right behind the team they're fighting for that playoff spot with. At 15, they went 2-2 this week. I moved them up 1 spot. I think Calgary's playing better hockey. So here's the thing. Calgary goes 2-2. Again, Vancouver 3-0-1. So Vancouver percentage-wise is catching up to Calgary. They're ahead of them in points right now. And so for Calgary, I still have them here, just ahead of Montreal and in that same region as Vancouver. So these 3 teams are all very close to one another. For the Flames, the structure of their game seems to be better under Daryl Sutter. Now it's a matter of figuring out a way to balance the structure and their creativity. We know their top 6 can be creative and score goals. So while learning this defensive structure and their goals against is coming down, they then have to figure out a way to get that creativity to still be there without some sloppy defensive mistakes ending up in the back of their net. So for the Flames, we'll see how it goes. There was the ugly loss against Edmonton, which was absolutely an ugly one, but still, they go 2-2 this week. They did get that win in Toronto last night, and now tonight they have the loss in Toronto, but it's a close one. I think overall they're playing better. We're going to see those lay an egg type of games like against Edmonton, although I think that also spoke for Edmonton starting to get their game together as well. Number 14, same spot as last week. They went 2-1 this week. So yeah, same spot as last week. They're now 16-10-5 overall, and that's St. Louis. So for the Blues, still have them at 14th. It's getting harder to move up or move down the list. It's getting, because a lot of these teams that are in the top 10 are playing really well. They don't lose very often, if at all. And so St. Louis had a pretty good week, but the teams ahead of them didn't have horrible weeks either. And if a team ahead of them had a bad week, they were too far ahead for St. Louis to pass them. So right now, St. Louis is in 14th. We'll see if they are next week as well. That game against San Jose tonight, that was partly impressive. There was also Dubnyk not necessarily having his best game, but they came out with the win. And of course, last night, San Jose, they managed to come out with 2 points too. So they're getting their points, right? And so St. Louis maintains their spot. Number 13, staying in the same spot as last week. They went 2-2. They're now 19-11-1, and that's Pittsburgh. One thing with Pittsburgh, they will deal with injuries. Every year, Pittsburgh has a lot of injuries. So does St. Louis, who are sitting right down here. These teams will always be dealing with injuries. It's just how that works. And for the record, Vancouver over the years always seems to be dealing with injuries. This year, it's just Patterson, not a big deal. But for Pittsburgh, it's getting to be a lot of players. It's getting to be a ton of players, and they're still maintaining a decent record. So for that reason, I'm keeping them in the same spot. I didn't move them up or down this week that I can remember. I don't think they changed. I do update the board every day. And then at the end of the week, I look at it and go, oh, all right, so everything stayed basically the same at the end of the week. Maybe you move up one spot, you move down a spot, and then it's the same at the end of the week. But yeah, so Pittsburgh, I have them fourth in their division. I do think they make the playoffs, and they could very well be dangerous. After a couple of first-round knockouts, and of course the knockout at the hands of, well, I guess we can qualify the Montreal first-round knockout if you want to, and then there was the Islanders. And then, yeah, so it's been a couple of years since we've seen Pittsburgh have any level of success in the playoffs, and maybe they're due, right? So we'll see if this is the year they're due. Number 12. These guys drop 4 spots. They went 2-2 this week. Overall, they're 18-10-1. And they were in that column. And then the 2 games against Colorado happened. And that's where, wow, they are so not in the same vicinity as Colorado. Minnesota. So Minnesota drops. Those games against Colorado were just overall, it was so poor on their part that I could not have them in the top 10. Could not justify having them in the top 10. There are some teams that may have had some struggles recently that are in the top 10. It showed how good Colorado can be, and to me it also showed just how poor a week Minnesota ended up having with those losses at the end of it, which is too bad because it kind of undoes the wins and the good feeling they would have had after playing against Vegas. But man, Colorado just smoked them twice. Number 11, dropping 2 spots from last week. They went 1-3 this week. And it was a rough week for them because, you know, you're against pretty good teams. You're against teams you're right up against in the standings. And for Winnipeg, they drop out of the top 10. It's the first time I can remember Winnipeg being out of the top 10 in a while. I remember, was it 3 years ago when I first started doing power rankings? And I used to get told, why do you have Winnipeg so high up? And it was that Winnipeg was playing really well, and it just wasn't showing in the record yet. Right now, I don't see them as playing necessarily better than other teams and not having the record for it. I think Hellebuck's been helping them at times, and now maybe some of that gloss is worn off. But Winnipeg drops out of the top 10 this week. Again, 1-3. Tonight's the first time they've lost back-to-back games in regulation all season. So it's not like there's a reason to be alarmed if you're a Jets fan. Just keep in mind there's other teams behind Winnipeg who are starting to get points. And for them, they now have the games against Vancouver coming up, That's key. If they go into Vancouver, if they beat them back-to-back, they help themselves out a lot, and they can get back on track. If this becomes a problem, like let's say Vancouver beats them in back-to-back games, both in regulation, then we have a whole other conversation next week for the power rankings. But for right now, they're 11th. Number 10, moving up 3 spots from last week. They went 3-1 this week. Impressive week for the Edmonton Oilers. Yep. The Oilers played well. So what's interesting is that on this board, you've got Edmonton 10th, Winnipeg 11th, Calgary 15th, Montreal 16th, and Vancouver 18th. They're all kind of bunching around together. And yeah, it's interesting to see how many of them are all bunched around together. And the Oilers seem to be playing well enough that they could very well end up being the team that emerges as the regular season first place team. And then the playoffs hit. And the playoffs this year are going to be a whole other beast, because those first 2 rounds, you're against teams that know you very, very well. So we'll see how things end up for the Oilers, but right now, things are looking up. Again, tonight's win over Winnipeg felt different. It just felt different. They went into that third period down, and they had the comeback victory, which has not been the way that their games have typically gone this year. So it's good news if you're an Oilers fan that they seem to be getting victories in ways that they've been losing games this year. Number 9. This team went 2-1 this week. They're 16-8-4. They move up 2 spots. Basically passing Winnipeg and Minnesota by their dropping more than anything they did this week, and that's Boston. Boston had a passable week. They were 2-1. Yes, that latest win was over the Buffalo Sabres. So again, I'm not giving them a spot. I'm not moving them up as much as Winnipeg and Minnesota drop. Otherwise, if Winnipeg and Minnesota had good weeks, odds are Boston's here. Edmonton might have ended up being 12th, which I know Oiler fans wouldn't necessarily been happy with. But if Winnipeg had a good week, it would have been at the expense of the Oilers. So, see, that's how that works. But yeah, for Boston, we'll see how long they're down, and we'll see how they are when they come out of it. There are teams that have come out of the COVID shutdowns and been better for it, and there are teams that have come out of those shutdowns and just had a rough time. So I have no idea how Boston's going to respond to this. When you see names like DeBrusk and Pasternak on the list, you don't know who's positive, you don't know who's going to actually develop symptoms, who isn't, and how long it's going to take for them to get over it. Hello, Mika Zibanejad. That's an issue. And that's always been rumored to be what was wrong with Zibanejad to start the season, was that he had it, and it took him a long time to get his legs and his wind back and his stamina, and now he's starting to produce. So we just don't know how it's going to look for Boston on the other side of this. Hopefully they play before next Saturday. Hopefully they come out and start playing again on Thursday. I think they can take the ice on Wednesday, and then we'll see where they're at, and then I can still rank them next week wherever they belong. Number 8, dropping 1 spot from last week. They went 1-2 this week, and we'll see whether or not the problem is their goaltender. Because for Freddie Anderson and the Toronto Maple Leafs, that's been the discussion all week, which was, all right, so is it all Freddie? So the North is all on the board now. This is where it gets interesting. The North, the top team is 8th. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 North teams within 10 spots of each other. This is the kind of parity that will drive fans to watch these games. Hopefully watch these games. I've started to see posts online like, I'm tired of seeing the same teams all the time. As I've said in previous videos, don't just watch your division. Don't just watch your favorite team play in your division. Watch other divisions, watch other teams. It definitely makes it feel less repetitive. There have been games where I've been watching these play against each other, and the announcers will say this is the 6th time they've played each other. And I'm like, oh, yeah, they have played each other 6 times. So it's important this season more than any other to watch other games, other teams. You may not even care, but it just feels better to watch those other games because then it doesn't feel quite as repetitive. And so Canada, it's going to be interesting to see which team emerges. Is it going to be the Oilers? Is it going to be Toronto? The win with Jack Campbell felt important tonight. We'll see whether or not that's the case. The shutout win, if he's the starter for a while, that could be huge. Because Freddie Anderson hasn't been good enough. And if a lower body injury's been bothering him, that could very well be why he hasn't been good enough. Doesn't help when you're going into contract negotiations, though. They just look at your numbers. They're not going to go, well, yeah, but you weren't playing well. They're going to say, hey, he wasn't playing well, and we don't care if it was because of it, because we're going to negotiate him down. Teams want to negotiate him down, especially with the flat cap and all that. Number 7. This team drops 2 spots from last week. They went 2-2. Couple of iffy games in there. So the question mark really with the Islanders is, so how good are they? Now they get the victory tonight and they look very good, right? But but Philadelphia looked really bad. So there's that question mark in there. Were the Islanders that good? Were the Flyers that bad? Are the Islanders back to playing the way they need to? And why is it that when we see the Islanders against teams that are really good in this division, do they seem to have problems? So we'll see over the coming weeks whether the Islanders stay in this column or not. I believe in the Islanders. I like the Islanders. Their overall 2-2 record this week, though, because of how good teams are playing in here, a 2-2 record ended up seeing them drop. Number 6, this team went 4-0 this week. So, yeah, 4-0. And dominant over their last 2 games. So they move up 4 spots from last week, which in the top 10, that's impressive, and it's Colorado. The Avs, 6th spot, and honestly, I can't wait to see them play against Vegas again. I'm anxious for them to play against Vegas again. I want to see between those two teams which one the best in the West really is. Because Colorado, the way they played against Minnesota was just, it was dominance. This was a team that went out there like, well, these guys think they're in our zone, do they? It sort of reminds me of like in Last Dance, right, with Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and how it looked close, and then all of a sudden it didn't. And I remember that, where the Bulls would just go out there and take over. And there's certain hockey teams, the Oilers in the 80s, the Penguins in the early 90s, where it's close, and then all of a sudden they would just will themselves to victories, and it was impressive to watch. And Colorado kind of has that air about them when they're going really, really well. So we'll see whether or not the Avs can build on this in coming weeks. Number 5. This team went 2-1 this week. They're 26-4. They dropped 1 spot from last week, and that's the Florida Panthers. So Florida's now number 5 on the board. You know what's interesting is I cannot remember Florida being in the top 5 in the power rankings for multiple weeks, ever, in the entire time I've had this channel. And I have rooted for the Florida Panthers. There have been seasons where Florida might be in the middle of the board, and people have said, do you have them in the middle of the board because you're really rooting for them to make the playoffs? And while I don't do that, on some level I'm thinking, I'd love for them to make the playoffs. I would love to see Florida finally end this malaise they've been in since 1996 when they went to the final. I'd like to see that not be the conversation anymore, and I'd like to see them stay in this spot, so or even move up. So this was a decent week for them. Again, they got passed. They had a team pass them that had a really good week. They had a rough day-to-day. But they went 3-1 on the week. They're now 27-4. They had won 7 in a row coming into today, and that's the Washington Capitals. So the top team in the East is Washington. There you go. Washington fights their way back up to the number 1 spot. They were, middle of the pack not too long ago. They've battled their way back up into the top 5. Again, the way that I do my power rankings, it has to be a gradual move up the board and gradual moves down, so that it's not just a knee-jerk reaction where teams are flying up, flying down, up, down. It has to be a gradual move. So, yeah, the Capitals right now, they're in the top 4. I didn't punish them for losing that game against the Rangers because, like I said, they won 7 in a row. So, and yes, the Islanders had won 8 in a row. They had a 2-2 week. And the Islanders only get passed by Colorado and Washington. I felt that Colorado and Washington belonged ahead of them. So, there you go. Number 3. These guys didn't necessarily have a great week, but they probably should have won tonight. They didn't. They're 1-1-2 on the week. They're now 27-3. They dropped 1 spot from where they were last week, and that's the Carolina Hurricanes. And yes, I used a Whalers magnet for the Hurricanes, because why not, using all the other throwbacks. So I swear the NHL with the reverse retros this week, it's just a way to make Shannon get all the jerseys. Because I've been using retro magnets for years. And so, yeah, Carolina, decent week. Again, 1-1-2. You can look at it and say they only won 1 out of 4. You can also counter and say they only lost 1 in regulation out of 4. So there's 2 ways to view it. I only dropped them 1 spot. I didn't feel like I had to go crazy and say, oh, that shootout loss tonight against Columbus, that's it, I got to drop them down. So, because again, they could have won that in overtime. It's just one of those barely offside things, and it happens. So, yeah, I generally do not punish teams when I see them on a play like that where they don't win the game, I don't say, oh, that's crazy. Sort of like New Jersey against the Islanders, where they could have won in the overtime, but offside, so the Subban goal doesn't count. Well, I'm not going to then turn around and say, oh, well, now New Jersey's got to drop because that goal was offside. So it's hard to balance that out, though, because, again, that happens regularly enough that, it depends on the timing. Number 2, these guys move up one spot from last week. They won all 3 games they played. And I'm telling you, if you're not watching this team, you're kind of missing out. The Vegas Golden Knights are very entertaining to watch. And if you like to watch a team that's never out, they can be down 3-0, and you're still watching and going, I don't believe that you're going to lose. That's the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas has been just dominant, basically over the season. They're right now 21-6-1, ridiculous points percentage for them. And I understand that you may look at the teams in their division and you might say, well, they have Anaheim, Arizona, San Jose, and LA. They're all not very good. Okay, but they're winning those games. They're winning the games that they should. And as easy as that may sound, some teams aren't. There are teams that struggle against Detroit, against Ottawa, against Anaheim. Not against Buffalo. But everybody else has a team that they've done pretty well against. And Vegas has done their best to make sure that there isn't a team that's doing really, really well against them, which is why, to me, they're the clear favorites to win that division. Then we get into the playoffs, and who knows what happens. But Vegas has been excellent, just absolutely excellent. So that brings us to number 1. Number 1, Tampa. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they went 3-1 this week. The one loss, of course, was with McElhinney in net, and I can't penalize them when McElhinney's in net. It's not the same. Vasilevsky's won 11 games in a row. Right now they're at 22-6-2. So they move up, they stay in the same spot as last week. They were number 1 last week too. And yeah, this is a team that looks like they're ready for the playoffs. They look like they're ready for the playoffs right now, which begs one question: could they be peaking too early? Because that does happen, where a team peaks in February when the playoffs start in April. This year it's March, the playoffs start in May. It's possible there's a team peaking early that when we get to the playoffs, maybe they end up petering out. I'm not saying that happens to Tampa. I'm just saying there's a team in this first column, definitely, that probably ends up losing in the first round, especially when you see 3 of them are in the Central. So one of them is guaranteed to be out in the first round. And then we can have a whole debate about whether their records and their overall standing is because of the division they're in or because they're just that good. And we have no way to know. Let me know your thoughts, though, in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing right through. You just happened upon this video. Again, closing out another week on the THG channel. Thank you guys so much for all your support throughout. It means a ton. And I will talk to you again soon.